Got it. Okay. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I've got a little tickle in my throat. I think it's just the usual seasonal stuff. For those of you who don't know, I've been a professor of ecology at Western for, well, this is my 26th year. I teach a whole bunch of wide range of courses, including 4 specifically about climate change. One of them is a general education course that I'll be offering. I'm offering it right now, but I'm also be offering it in the summer. If anyone is interested, if they're late high school age kid is looking for something to do, if you're just interested in expanding your horizons, it's bio 150. Email me, and Aurelio can give you my contact, and I'll send you the syllabus, and you can take it. You know, it's doesn't have any prerequisites. All right, so this is our science building. I use this as my standard start screen. Let's see. Now, what we're going to be doing tonight is talking about heat, how hot it's likely to get, and what effect that extra heat is going to have on the environment and human health and other related things. There's a variety of organizations around the world that put out summaries of the yearly data, the data which has come before, in such a way that the general public can see what things are like, how things are currently as compared with the past. One of the types of graphs that they put out is, and this is an organization called Berkeley Earth. They basically they make a graph showing the 10 warmest years in history. And in history, we're talking about anything since the Industrial Revolution. In the case of this kind of data, it's everything since 1850, because it was about that time when we were able to collect enough data to make these kind of estimates. We didn't at the time, but going back and looking at previous data, we can get some idea of how things were. As you can see, that the top 10 years in, the top 7 years in history have all been since 2015. 2021 is the 7th or 6th, depending on whether you're looking at the British or the American data. Now, these sorts of graphs and other graphs I'm going to show you are what are called, they are all called anomalies. And what it is they're comparing the data from one year compared to a average of a previous time. Okay, so that the average we're comparing to is 1850 to 1900. All right, so the average of 1850 to 1900, in comparison to that, the warmest 2 years in history were 2016 and 2020. We can look at the whole collection of estimates going back to 1850, and you can see each one of those dots is a yearly average temperature. The blue line gives us an idea of what the trend is, and the lines going up and down are ones that tell us how certain we can be about that data point. And you can see that there is a bit of up and down from year to year, and that's due to random things that don't have anything specifically to do with humans, like volcanoes erupting and so on. But the trend is still pretty clear. Another way to look at this data is to take 1 year and every point on Earth to show by color how that year was compared to this same 1951 to 1980 average. Okay. Now, what you can see is that any area that is blue is cooler than that average. Anything that is warmer than that average is going to be yellow, red, and deep red. What you can see is there isn't much blue. There's a little bit. If you look at west of South America, you can see the ocean was blue. That was because 1921 began as a La Nina year, and that's what we typically associate with La Ninas. You also see that most of the northern hemisphere was really, really warm. Now, another type of graph which we can find that they started creating just in the last couple of years is showing the warming country by country. And so each one of these circles is a country, names on it, and the number of degrees above that 1851 to 1980 average. Any that is red is warmer than the average. Anything in blue, and I don't see it except for Kiribati, is cooler than the average. Any circle that has a black ring around it indicates that that is a historic high, a record year. You can look at it in terms of temperature, but you can also look at climate change in terms of moisture and precipitation. Hang on just a second. Sorry. The other room I was kind of distracted. Okay, so if we look at this map here, we can see that some areas in green are wetter than an average, and anything in brown is drier than an average. Okay, so not only is the world heating up in most places, most years, but some areas are getting wetter because of it. Some areas are getting drier because of it. You can see that one of the areas that's getting drier is in Western and Central Africa, a place where people are not particularly well off anyway. All right. Now, as an effort to stabilize climate, the UN and organizations that that study these things have suggested that we try our best to limit the amount of warming to at most 1.5 degrees Celsius above what it was at the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and so at 1.5 degrees, that is our target, right? If temperature goes up a smidge more to 2 degrees, then there's going to be more problems. Okay, the differences are losing most of the coral reef at 1.5 degrees as opposed to losing virtually all of it. Okay, things like that. It could be the difference between a general stability of the Antarctic ice sheet as opposed to a general instability of the Antarctic ice sheet. So the difference between 1.5 and 2 is actually fairly significant. As it turns out, we have already raised, as a global average, 1.19 degrees. So we're almost to 1.5. Or we're well on our way. Now, these are the areas. This is a new map I just found. This is data going up through 2021, so it's all brand new information. Those areas in blue are counties in the United States that are actually below, have cooled a smidge, okay, relative to the average temperature from 1895 to 1921. Anything that's in red is warmer and considerably warmer. So if you look at Connecticut, it is all considerably warmer than it was in the average of 1895 to 2021. If you look at Fairfield County, then you see that we are up over 2 degrees already. Okay, as can be said for a lot of the areas of the East Coast that are urban and some of the areas of the West Coast that are urban. If you look at the counties and how much they have warmed up, some of them are pretty amazing. If we compare now to pre-industrial 1895 to 2021, Ventura, California has gained 2.62 degrees Celsius. If we look at the North Slope of Alaska, it's gained 3.72, but the data doesn't go back as far there, and it starts from 1970. So there's a good chunk of the U.S. which is already past that 1.5 and well past the 2.0 warming already. Okay. Now, Connecticut, if we look at those, the state's population that is above 1.5, all 3.6 million people of our state are living in conditions which are above what we hope the world average will be. All right. Now, climate change isn't just warming of the atmosphere. It is all the things that go along with it. It includes ice melting. That's really the thermometer. If the ice is melting year after year after year, that tells us that we are in fact warming climate. If the world were not warming, the ice would not be melting. But there are a lot of biological things, such as the redistribution of organisms, spring coming earlier, tree lines moving poleward, and so on. And also things like ocean heat content going up, which is going to melt the ice sooner, and humidity going up, and so on. Now, as far as ice goes, the Antarctic ice, meaning the ice that's floating around in the Antarctic Sea directly around Antarctica, is an indicator of the health of that ice, if you want to call it that, in Antarctica. And what we can see here is each one of these gray lines is a year showing how much ice there was at different parts of the warm season, this is the warm season down there. And we can see that in 2022, this is as fresh as data gets, we are significantly lower in sea ice. There is less ice, fewer icebergs floating around in the Antarctic Ocean and other floating ice than ever in history, or since we've been able to collect this kind of data. Now, as I mentioned before, going along with heat is precipitation. And this graph is showing us data that only goes up to 2016, showing that in the last 30 years, these is showing an average of the 30 years previous to 2016 as compared to the whole 20th century average. And you can see that there are some areas of our country which are wetter, as is our state, as is the Midwest, Missouri, where I grew up, and so on. But there are also lots of areas which are significantly drier. Now, that dryness, of course, makes forest fires more common than they would be otherwise. The extra heat and the deficit of moisture are going to lead us to more fires. Now, fire behavior, and this is in a paper This graph has been around for a while, but I found it in a publication from just last year. The fire behavior, how much fire you get, how quickly it spreads, the duration is all a function of three big scale factors. One is how much fuel there is, how much wood there is to burn. Another is the topography, the hilliness of the area. And the third is the weather. There is a particular kind of fire weather, fire climate, long term, and that is to have a fairly dry climate, and sometimes particularly dry, and to have a time of the year that is significantly hot. And the key thing is to have a dry lightning, which is lightning which is not associated with rain. Okay. Now, probably don't think of dry lightning too much, but in the West, it's certainly common. Okay, you'll have a big thunderhead come through with lightning and thunder, but no rain, or not very much rain. And that is the source of most of the forest fires in the West. That is the source of most of the forest fires in Alaska, where I went to grad school. Okay, and occasionally someone will accidentally start a fire by flicking their ciggy butt out the window, or burn something carelessly, but generally it's dry lightning. So anytime we have an increase in dry weather, an increase in heat, an increase in the amount of dry lightning, or all three, we're going to have more fires if there's something to burn. Now, if we look at the western part of the United States, we can actually see from 1973 through 2020, the total number of days on average, or total number of days, I guess, in that time period, where the weather was appropriate to start these fires, where it was warm, where it was dry, where there was dry lightning. And you can see that we have an increase in large areas in the West, and a decrease in only a few. And so we are likely to see more frequent, more severe, more long-lasting fires going forward. Now, if we look at fires in the rest of the world, we see similar things going on in Africa, in the Congo, which is a rainforest that is under pressure for logging and so on. We have increased number of fires. Okay? And in the northern part of Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, southern China, likewise. The world is drying. The world is warming, and so some parts are drying, and the likelihood of fire goes up. And this map shows us why an area is most likely to burn. Okay, in the Amazon, you most likely to have a natural fire if you have a particular dry time. Okay, if we're talking about central Alaska, it's because you have an increased number of ignitions, more of the kind of dry lightning and so on. Okay. In some areas, it's because of the way the fires are managed in the country. All right. Now, fires are not just a matter of burning up trees. That's a natural process, by the way. It's part of nature's reset system, where it doesn't happen too much at a time. But fire is also a terrible source of smoke, which is a health hazard for humans. This is Seattle, by the way. I think last summer, when they had all that dry weather, and they had fires not too far away. I know it's Seattle because of the Space Needle. If you've ever been there, you've seen that. Now, the effect of climate change on human health is a big issue, and it's growing in concern. There was just last year a big an op-ed, an opinion piece that was published jointly by a couple of hundred of the world's great medical journals, okay, including the Journal of the American Medical Association and the Lancet and the British Journal and all that sort of stuff, the New England Journal of Medicine, the whole crowd. Very few of them didn't publish it. And this report, I mean, this op-ed was basically saying that climate change is large scale, the most important problem to human health on planet Earth right now. And associated with this, released at the same time in the Lancet, which is a British medical journal, is a big report showing some of the data which led them to say that. All right, heat waves. Okay, heat waves are something that a lot of places deal with in the summer. A time of continued extra heat where people are put into danger. Okay, those people most in danger of heat waves are the folks over 65 and infants. Okay, those of us in between 1 and 65 are generally healthy enough and able to manage heat waves better than the old folks and the very, very young. And what we see is the number of people in those two categories, old folks and young folks, that are being exposed to heat waves has always gone up and down, but the trend is fairly clear that we're getting more and more increased exposure to heat waves. And those areas where heat waves are particularly hard on the elders, 65 and older, are the ones in the orange countries, including ours, including India and China and Russia, and that's an awful lot of people. Now, associated with these heat waves are droughts. And, you know, hot weather and dry weather go together often. And so what we've seen is of total area, land area affected by drought, okay, in really bad and even worse, yellow is really bad and blue is even worse. The amount of the Earth's surface which is affected by drought has been going up. Not every year, it goes up and down, but the trend is clear again. Not only that, but the warm air and in some places, not all, extra precipitation has led to an increase in the kind of insects which will carry diseases, including the Aedes mosquitoes that carry dengue fever, which is very serious in some parts of the world, and the Anopheles mosquitoes that carry malaria and yellow fever and some others. And the difference in the lines if we look at B, the malaria chart, the light colored blue there are those areas where the economic development is low, high population, low economic development. The area in green is those areas which have high economic development. And what we can see is that the people in the wealthier areas of the world are less affected by these changes in malaria, at least, and those that are of low economic development are more affected. Poor folk. Now, also, there are bacterial diseases which are carried by water. Cholera, you may have heard of that one. That's a killer. Vibrio cholerae, likewise, is going up, and it's been high for a long time in undeveloped areas, and it's starting to increase in developed areas. Another aspect of health that is associated with heat is our agriculture system. And looking at 5 important food crops: maize, corn, winter wheat, spring wheat, rice, and soybeans, we see over time, and the scale here on the x-axis is 1980 through 2020, is for there to be a change. It goes up and down over time, but the trend is fairly clearly down. Now, you'll notice that the decrease in the amount of rice production over time is less than maize and so on. Rice is less sensitive to increased heat than is wheat and soybeans and so on. So rice will be more and more an important food crop. Now, now let's talk about human physiology, the things that would affect us specifically and directly. Okay, you know, we've all experienced it on a hot day. If you're out running around outside, and you warm up and you start to sweat, and your body's way of cooling itself is evaporation through your lungs to some degree, to a lot of degree, and evaporation through your skin. Okay, now what happens is, you know, the liquid goes to the outside of your skin, the liquid evaporates, and it takes an extra amount of heat away from your body. Evaporative cooling, that's the way mammals are evolved to cool ourselves. Now, there is 2 things that cause that. Well, 3 if you count activity, physical activity. If you run around, you're going to warm your muscles up and sweat more. Okay, that's one. Okay, another one is the temperature, and the third is the humidity. Humidity, if it's a very humid day, your sweat does not evaporate efficiently. Okay, so humid days are less comfortable to us than dry days. You can stay more comfortable in the desert at a higher temperature than you can in the tropics and the humid tropics at that same temperature. Okay, has to do with the ability of your body to evaporate. Now, turns out there is actually a combination of heat and humidity which can exceed our body's ability to cool itself, and that is called the wet bulb temperature. At 100% relative humidity, is just as a calibration point, at 33 degrees Celsius, our ability to sweat, our ability of our sweat to evaporate starts to decrease to the point where we're having trouble cooling our bodies and we have the onset of heat stress. At 35 degrees and 100% humidity, that's what we call wet bulb 35, and that is when our body our sweat can no longer evaporate, and we cannot cool ourselves down. That does happen. Okay, a wet bulb 35 temperature, and it doesn't have to be 100% humidity. You could have a higher temperature and a lower humidity and still have the same effect. Okay, that is just kind of a rule of thumb that 100% humidity, 35 degrees Celsius, people start dying. Right now, if the wet bulb temperature 35 does not last long, then people can in fact find relief from, you know, getting wet, jumping in the lake somewhere, probably pretty warm in the lake, or air conditioning. Okay, if you can go into the air conditioning, it's okay. But the thing is the air conditioning runs by power. That power is mostly generated from factors which will increase the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which will then warm the climate. So it's not a good situation when we have humidities and temperatures that high. There are places in recent times where we've measured temperatures very near to that. Some areas in the northern Midwest in the 1995 was, in the wet bulb 30 to 31 range. In parts of China in 2017, it was also that hot. The Persian Gulf is an area that's particularly vulnerable because it's hot and it's right there surrounded by water, so the humidity is high. Another place is parts of India, South Asia, and Pakistan, where because of you have a heat and then you have these particular structures called well, I'll get to it, where you have particular weather patterns where the heat is concentrated and continues to bake like a convection oven. Will show up. Now in northern India, there's an area where just south of the Himalayas where you tend to have these big convection oven type heat domes. That's the word I was looking for. Heat domes show up where if we were to have a real tragedy associated with wet bulb 35 conditions, it may be there. In fact, there are areas in northern India, Agra and Delhi, that in Lucknow, which have been in the 48 range, but not humid enough to actually trigger that threshold yet, at least not for very long. And as I was mentioning, there is a particular type of weather pattern that will sometimes show up called heat domes. We can have them here. They had heat domes in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle and Portland and southern part of British Columbia. They're found in a lot of different places. They had a massive heat dome in northern Russia a couple years ago. And these are conditions where you have basically a high pressure system sitting on a bunch of hot air, which just recycles within this particular area and gets hotter and hotter and hotter before it's knocked away and it moves on and dissipates. This is the heat dome that was found, for a while in the Pacific Northwest. You probably all heard about it, how Seattle and Portland were suffering. This is also called an omega block, and it has to do with the shape of the jet stream. It's shaped like the Greek letter omega. And this was a serious thing, particularly for a part of the world that is not prepared for them. This area here in purple, southern British Columbia, had the highest temperature ever recorded in Canada, and it was a little town, or I don't know how big it is, Lytton, BC. And on June 29th, 2021, it reached the temperature of 49.6 Celsius, 121 Fahrenheit. And you can see how far away from the normal that is in that particular part of the world. Crazy weather. I mean, absolutely crazy, unknown type of weathers. We don't know where these will pop up. I can think we can expect them to be more common as time goes on. And we can expect that urban populations will generally suffer more than rural populations will from them. Okay. And because urban environments tend not to cool off at night because of all the cement, the heat island effect. And so over time, we see the number of people that are being exposed to extreme heat is going up. The trend is up, and so on. Now, cities are particularly vulnerable to these, and you can see in yellow to red those cities that between 1983 to 2016 have had an increase in the exposure of the human population to excess heat. India is hot and getting hotter, for instance. I lived in Thailand for a while as a kid, and it was pretty doggone hot there and very humid, and it's getting hotter. So generally speaking, climate change affects the health and the environment in a variety of ways. One is through extreme weather, which leads to rainfalls that are either way too high or way too low. Strong winds, because heat, anytime you have a high pressure system and low pressure system near each other, there's going to be wind between them. And the closer they are together, the stronger the wind, the more different they are in terms of pressure, the stronger the wind. Dry lightning, high temperatures, you're going to have wildfire seasons increase. The increase of wildfires is going to decrease the amount of biomass of plants that are going to be sucking CO2 back out of the atmosphere. It'll be thawing the permafrost in the subarctic regions, and it will. Is there a faster way to put more CO2 in the atmosphere than burning trees? I don't know what it is. Now, one more thing, which is intriguing, that has to do with increased temperature, is the outbreaks of zombie pathogens. And I don't mean pathogens are going to turn you into a zombie. I'm saying that pathogens, the disease-causing organisms, are the zombies. For instance, in 2016, in northern Russia, there's back in the early part of the 20th century, there was an outbreak of anthrax. Many of the native indigenous people in this particular part of Siberia, throughout a lot of Siberia, are reindeer herders. That's how they make their living, like the Sami who live in northern Scandinavia. They herd reindeer, they milk the reindeer, they eat the reindeer, and so on. That's their traditional way of life. And a bunch of these reindeer caught anthrax, which is a disease that is from the bacteria from the soil, but can cause deadly disease to mammals. A bunch of these reindeer caught anthrax and died. Because the area is permafrosted, meaning in the summer you can't dig very far down in the ground to actually bury these reindeer. They had to bury the reindeer shallow in shallow holes and make big mounds over them. And then in 2016, the permafrost melted, and these mounds of reindeer began to become, that had been frozen all this time, began to be exposed. And the anthrax came back alive. It was never dead. It was just frozen in a resting state. All right. So repeated outbreaks of anthrax in Siberia, early 20th century. More than 1 million reindeer were killed by the disease. 7,000 burial grounds with infected carcasses. 7,000 different places where the reindeer were buried. Okay. Generally speaking, the areas hardest hit was this peninsula in northern Russia, the Yamal Peninsula. Okay, which was, as you can see, almost 2,000 kilometers from Moscow. The carcasses of the reindeer killed by anthrax bacteria froze in the permafrost for 75 years, thawed in 2016 during heat wave, which they had not had anything like that up to that point. And the anthrax was reactivated by the warming. And 20 2,000 reindeer were infected. Dozens of people were hospitalized and one child perished from a disease which had been buried in the ground and frozen for 75 years. That's a zombie parasite and zombie pathogen. And it's quite possible that there'll be others come out of the cold climates as well, not just anthrax. One thing we have to remember is that humans are part of nature. We're not outside of it. We are organisms. We live in ecologies. Okay. What kills disease, diseases which can kill reindeer can kill us. Diseases which can kill God knows what, bats in China can kill us. Okay. Many of the diseases that we suffer from are zoonoses, which are diseases that jump species. They jump from animals to humans, humans to animals, back and forth. Most of the pneumonias are like that, including the 1918 pneumonia that killed so many people. Smallpox, chickenpox, and that whole range of things are zoonoses. The Black Plague is too. So a lot of the diseases which are infectious diseases that have harmed humans in large numbers in the past were these kinds of things. And they are infecting us because we are part of nature. We have to remember that. Knowing well that we're in an environment where the temperatures are warming, knowing that the warming is largely due to our own behavior which we can change, even if it's inconvenient to do so, means that we need to do some clear thinking. We need to do some deep thinking, and we need to sort out the simple answers which are largely wrong and acknowledge that we're going to have to do things which, for the good of our children and grandchildren, are not going to be easy for us. They're going to be inconvenient, and some of them are going to be expensive. But in the end, how much money does it cost to fix a torched planet? Well, more money than we got. So it's cheaper to save it from being torched to begin with. And that leads to a couple of moral imperatives, one of which I'll leave you with here, which is that it's not only a matter of the people we know who are the most vulnerable to climate change and all of its effects, but it is those people who are those least responsible for causing it and maintaining it and making it worse. It's not the folks that live in villages in Africa. It is the people who live in metropolitan areas or live in a way that increases the amount of CO2 and methane and CFCs in the atmosphere. Okay. We have to remember that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to our kids. We have a responsibility to each other's kids and each other's grandkids. We have a responsibility to clean up our own mess. And so I leave you with this bit of advice. It's a plea, and that is, I ask you to choose not to look away. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions if you have any.
If you have any questions, please go ahead and type it in the chat, please.
If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, and then I'll go try to find the answer. So the next time someone asks me that, I'll be prepared to answer it.
Okay, we have one. How important is reducing meat consumption to helping the environment?
It is important. Now, reducing meat consumption is probably the way to phrase it. Not everyone going vegan. Now, it's a good thing for individuals to eat less meat. Okay, it's good for our health. But the issue with eating meat is that some animals, meat animals, specifically those that have a rumen, talking about cows and sheep and goats, have the ability to produce methane. Well, I should say the bacteria in their rumen have the ability to produce methane. And the methane is a much stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. It's about 17,000, no, I don't know. It's a couple of dozen times more strong than CO2 is in terms of molecule for molecule ability to warm the climate. Okay. Now, among those animals I just mentioned, the Western breeds of cattle, apparently cows were domesticated at least twice in human history. And the types of traits that we selected for in Western cattle make them produce more methane than the Asian cattle do. Okay. For reasons that I'm not entirely sure about, but I can probably guess at. Sheep and goats produce pound for pound far less methane, and chickens and pigs very much less than that. So it's a matter of not only methane production, it's a matter of land production and the consumption of other food that humans might eat instead, and other considerations as well. So yeah, it's important.
Also, Gloria, will you be giving specific suggestions that individuals consider in future lectures?
Oh, and in other words, what you should do to help fix climate change? Is that what you're asking about? Aurelio, am I interpreting that question correctly?
I believe so.
Okay. Yes, I normally do. I do this quite a lot, actually, the speaking, and I have many different versions of this talk. And, and in the general talk, I finish up with things that individuals can do and things that must be done at larger scale. In other words, governments and corporations and larger groups of people have to make those decisions. Okay, like setting laws about, taxing or reducing the amount of money shoveled into the coffers of greenhouse gas producers. There are things that governments can do that you and I can't do. Right. So yeah, I have a whole raft of those things, and I can, if you like, at maybe. Oh, in fact, the last talk in the series in April is called Hope. And it will be specifically about all the things that we might do. Not all of them you can do specifically, but we as human beings can do. And there'll be some surprising things too, like make sure that all women and girls have an education. That's not something you probably necessarily think about in terms of helping to fix climate change, but it's an important one.
Anyone else have any questions for Mitch? Actually, I may have one to give. Oh, here we go.
All the slides available? Yeah, I mean, the slides are. I'd be happy to share any materials that I have. These slides are ones that I've clipped out, graphs from a bunch of peer review publications and so on. So it'd be no problem. Just make sure that ask Aurelio to remind me to send the PowerPoint to him, and then he can give it to whoever wants it, or I can give it to you directly. But he has my email address, and he's has my permission to give it out.
And also, these are going to be up on the Danbury Library's YouTube page. So you'll be able to see
Oh,
part
that's
one
right. You can
and
watch
part
this
two.
again.
So
Watch
if
it
you
all
can
over
dig this
again.
out, you can like the part one or part two, you can go ahead. I think by tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening, you'll have parts one and part two together to watch at your leisure or to share with your network of friends and family. One question I do have, what do you think, Mitch, right now of what we're going? How are things from your perspective?
Not good. There's some new data from the UN, which is basically collected from data collected by scientists all over the world, that indicate that sea levels are going to rise faster than we had anticipated, and that some areas of the world are going to heat up and dry out faster than others, to a point where they will no longer be inhabitable by humans.
Can you name those places that
Haven't
are?
read those. I haven't read the papers yet. I'm,
Oh.
I can guess that there will be places in the Sahel, sub-Saharan Africa, that it will qualify there. There's probably going to be places in some of the more severe climates. There are going to be island nations that will be entirely below sea level. What do you do with an entire country if no one can live there? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. But the Maldives and in the Indian Ocean, and Kiribati in the Pacific, and a number of other places are going to be underwater and uninhabitable. And they will become uninhabitable before they're underwater, because the inhabitants won't have access to fresh water. If you're on an island, you can't drink salt water. And it's going to be rough.
Are there places in the United States that you think will feel the first effects of this?
Already, southern Louisiana, down the coast of Louisiana, there is land that has been lost already. And so the shape of the state is not what it once was a couple of decades ago. The coastal areas are the places that are going to change the quickest. Southern Florida. Southern Florida is going to be a rough place, because they're going to have salt intrusion on their freshwater aquifers. They're going to have sea level rise. They're going to have instability of the geology, where some of the buildings are constructed. The state's going to lose a lot of its real estate taxes, and therefore its revenue, and it's going to be kind of a mess. Anybody planning on retiring to Miami might want to look into that.
I already had a friend of mine who's like, "Oh, I love Miami. I was just, she was just there, and she's like, I'm thinking about moving here." And I'm like, I just bit my tongue.
Well, it depends on, do you feel lucky? I mean, who knows how long these things are going to take. The thing is, the sea level rise, and then you throw on the storm surge of a big hurricane, and you are increasing incrementally the damage that you're going to have in those areas.
Yeah, that's right. And the same thing with, correct me if I'm wrong, New York City.
Yep. Lower Manhattan, Back Bay of Boston, New Orleans, Miami, Charleston, South Carolina, the whole Chesapeake Bay area, including Washington, D.C. There's a good portion of Washington, D.C. that is endangered. That part, which is near the Potomac River. And that big Navy base in Virginia, coastal Virginia, Norfolk, I think it is. The Navy has already started to reinforce their facilities there for that reason, the fact that sea level's rising. And there's a whole bunch of cities abroad, like Shanghai and Lagos, Nigeria, and Bangkok, Thailand, and in the swampy areas in the southern part of Bangladesh, there's what, 16 million people living within a meter of sea level. Where are they going to go? It's not a good situation. And the longer we try to ignore it and try to look away, the worse it gets.
A question from Janine. I think the small steps that each of us can do will add up to be significant. Small as recycling, composting, etc.
Yep. They are all necessary, but by themselves not sufficient. So yes, do all that. It's good for you. It's good for the world. But also realize that we've got to lean on people that have the power to make bigger scale changes that will be necessary to fix the situation. So vote.
What do you think about nuclear power?
I think it's going to be necessary for a while. There's nuclear power and there's nuclear power. There's, some facilities are better constructed than others, and then there's the Chernobyls of the world. And and insofar as nuclear facilities are in the way of wars, as we seem to see in Ukraine right now, they're in danger. And but if they are sufficiently protected and they are sufficiently constructed and maintained and engineered, and they're not in a war zone, they are as close to carbon neutral as anything, as long as all those other things, nothing bad happens. So yeah, I think they're going to be the gateway from one world to the other, as much as anything will be a kind of a bridge from the old world to the new. There are some technologies that need to be looked into, and I am no nuclear engineer by any case. Thorium is a technology that shows promise and perhaps is less stable and more robust than some of the others.
What about wind farms?
I choose, as a Connecticut resident, I buy my electricity from Eversource, like the rest of you do, and you do have the choice of deciding where that electricity is coming from. Okay, and I choose to pay a little bit more and buy electricity that's from wind and hydro. And so I probably would not want to live underneath a wind rotor for noise, but I do not find them unsightly at all. In fact, when I see windmills, wind farms, I think of hope. I think my grandson might have a future.
Upon recent events, do you think this wars are going to happen over dwindling resources?
Maybe. I think the one resource which is not dwindling is human stupidity and hubris and egos and all that sort of stuff. That's something we need to fix, if that's possible. There are sometimes good things, side effects that come out of these, like perhaps I can hope, fingers crossed, maybe I'm naive to think that Western Europe might be able to kick their gas habit by this particular situation, so that they'll no longer be buying gas from Russia. It will be hard on Russia, but it will be good for the world. Russia's got plenty of wind. They got a lot of land. They could put wind out too. But I'm not a political scientist, and I can't really accurately make predictions, if anyone can.
Thanks so much, Mitch. We're going to have to end this evening's presentation.
All right. I'll see you all next month.
Yeah, please register for part 3. And on behalf of the Friends of the Danbury Library, I bid you good night.